If you wait to buy a house in 2025, you could end up spending thousands more in tax because of one upcoming change. If you're new here, I'm a qualified accountant with over 10 years experience working as a tax advisor. The change I'm talking about is to stamp duty land tax. Stamp duty land tax, or SDLT, is the tax that you pay on land transactions in England and Northern Ireland. You don't pay it in Wales and Scotland because those countries have a separate tax. It applies when you buy a house, which is usually freehold, or an apartment, which is usually leasehold, and it also applies to transfers and ownership. So if you were to transfer a property into a company. The buyer is responsible for paying SDLT, so it is a cost that you have to factor in when you're moving house. Two things will happen from the 1st of April 2025 to make buying a house less tax advantageous. First of all, the nil rate bands for stamp duty are changing. The nil rate band is the proportion of the purchase price on which you pay 0% stamp duty. In September 2022, those nil rate bands were temporarily increased, which means that since September 2022, buyers have been paying less or no stamp duty. So at the moment, if you're a first-time buyer and your property price is less than £625,000, you will not pay any stamp duty on the first £425,000. If you're not a first-time buyer and you're moving house, but you don't own other properties, then you don't pay any stamp duty on the first £250,000. That's your nil rate band. From the 1st of April 2025, those nil rate bands are reducing, which means that you have to pay stamp duty on a larger proportion of the purchase price. So for first-time buyers, the nil rate band is going down from 425k to 300k. And for people moving house, but who are not first-time buyers, that's going down from 250k to 125k. So to illustrate how this would work, let's say you're moving house and you want to buy a new house and sell your current one, and the one you've seen costs £350,000. So today, you wouldn't pay any stamp duty on the first 250k, and then you would pay stamp duty at 5% on the last 100k. So your stamp duty bill would be £5,000. If you delayed buying that house until April 2025, you would pay 0% stamp duty on the first 125,000. You would then pay 2% on the next 125,000, and you would pay 5% on the last 100,000. So your stamp duty bill would be £7,500. So the difference in that scenario would be £2,500 if you waited to move house until April 2025. And then the second change is to first-time buyers relief. So at the moment, if you're a first-time buyer and you're buying a house for less than 625k, you can benefit from that nil rate band of 425k like we just mentioned. But if you buy a house for more than 625k, you have to follow the same rules as everybody else, which means that you get that lower nil rate band as people who have already bought a house and are just selling and then buying again. But from the 1st of April 2025, that relief is reducing from 625k to 500k, which means that if you're a first-time buyer and you buy a house for over 500k, you don't get to benefit from that larger nil rate band. So for people who are living in London, for example, they might well be first-time buyers who do buy a house for over 500k. And if you're in that position, it means that you can't benefit from the increase in the nil rate band that first-time buyers usually get. So you might wonder why this is happening, but the temporary increase in September 2022 was never supposed to be permanent. It was just supposed to increase property transactions and residential investment. And there was always predicted to be a negative impact on the exchequer, which we can see here in these forecasts. So it was never supposed to be a permanent measure. So waiting to buy a house until April 2025 could make things more expensive from a tax perspective, but there are, of course, other things that you have to factor into your decision. Interest rates on mortgages are still quite high and they are expected to be cut further, so you may decide that it's worth waiting to see what happens to interest rates on mortgages, because that may well outweigh the benefit that you see in any stamp duty saving. But it is just worth being aware of the stamp duty changes and then factoring that into your purchase costs. It's also worth saying that the Labour government could decide to extend the stamp duty reliefs, which means extending the amount of time that the higher nil rate bands are available. But it is unlikely that they'll do that because they haven't said that they will, and it was always supposed to be a temporary measure. I hope this brief stamp duty update was helpful. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel because it really will help it to grow, and I will see you next time.